That's one of the things that stuck with both of us is there is no normal reaction to an abnormal event like that. The taking of a human life it should be a very abnormal event. So it meant more to me that these folks would take their own time, drop everything, and fly across the country or drive across the country, not only to help me, but to help my family. Deep rage that, a man had tried to kill her husband and a man had tried to kill the father of her kids. So we've got 3 kids now, and it's the thought of becoming a single parent and raising children because some less desirable human being had tried to kill him. It's deep. There was a well of emotion there. And what do we do with that until we have somebody to process that with? And friends are great, but unless they're friends that have been through something similar to that, either military spouses or law enforcement spouses, they can't speak into that. Fugitive ended up shooting through the door and killing one of the task force officers, and then jumped out a second or third story window and got on a high-speed chase. And they got him, on the highway after a standoff. But Jake was killed during that, and we got that call. So we were up there as fast as possible, just dealing with all the blowout from that, because I want to say he had 2 kids.
You're listening to the ATO Bridging the Divide podcast, brought to you by the Assist the Officer Foundation.
Since 1999, the ATO has given assistance to the first responder community, and now we want to give them a platform to hear their incredible stories.
We also want to hear the stories of the many people that support us.
Our community is small, but it is strong.
We have differences. We don't always agree, and we all make mistakes.
But together we can grow, we can heal.
And we can learn from those mistakes.
And together we can bridge the divide.
Hello, ATO friends. I'm Joe King, and we're here with the amazing Misty Van Kuren, and we have more ATO story time. Today's guest is a dear friend of mine. We go back years to work in drug houses in the streets of South Dallas. When he left, become a US Marshal, I knew I lost an incredible coworker and friend I could call anytime, and he would come running. However, I was proud of him for starting a new journey in his career with the Marshals. He came on for episode 3. And that's back when we had the crappy mics and we didn't know what we were doing. We still don't know what we're doing now, but at least we have good mics. He is one of our top downloaded episodes. His story resonated with a lot of listeners because I get feedback all the time from across the country. I said at the end of that episode we may have him on for part 2 at some point. And here he is for part 2. This guest has conducted hard target searches of every gas station residence, warehouse, farmhouse, henhouse, outhouse, and doghouse in that area. Fugitive fans will get that. US Marshal Chris White, welcome back to the ATO stage.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Misty.
Welcome back.
So, a lot's happened since you were here before. How are you?
Good.
This is we're recording the week of Thanksgiving. It's actually the day before Thanksgiving. We're so behind. Who knows when this is going to come out, but I'm really excited because when we first had you on, we talked about so many things, and I really want to get into one line that you said, and then I've had fans reach out talking about you're not alone. Okay, I want you to get into that here in a bit, but there's like another side of your story that nobody's heard, because I wanted to get you back on. Then you start telling me about these CIRT and the critical response team that you're a part of, and some of these other incidents that you didn't mention in your first episode. And I want you to get into those today if you can.
Absolutely.
So what have you been up to now since for a year and a half that we released your episode?
Yeah, so when I came on the first time, I was still a team leader for the Gulf Coast Regional Fugitive Task Force. We were based in Jackson, Mississippi. We covered the majority of the central portion of the state. We were in Jackson, but it was anywhere all the way to the Louisiana line to the west, all the way to the Alabama line to the east, and then about an hour to an hour and a half north and south. So we had a large geographical area. Jackson, Mississippi it's a city that's decreasing in population over the last probably 20 years. Right now it sits around 165,000 people, and they've been averaging the last few years 150 homicides a year. So statistically, if they reported their data to the FBI, UCR, they'd be probably number 1 or 2. But they don't, so they don't get a lot of the press, but it is an exceedingly violent city. We worked a lot of homicide warrants and a lot of violent crime warrants. It was a lot of fun. I loved it. It was probably the best 6 years of my career. And then back in February, it coincided with the birth of our third child, I took an opportunity that I'd kind of been kicking the can on. I got to a point where I couldn't kick the can anymore. And got a great opportunity to go over to the US Marshal's TOG unit, which is the Technical Operations Group. And I'm a senior inspector investigator over there. And what I do, kind of simplifying it, if I would tell a civilian, I'd tell them that I'm a major case consultant. There's a regional task force out there. I cover about 6 of their offices, so they've all got fugitive teams. And on major cases, I'll come in, I'll consult, I'll do what I can from my office, and then about 50% of the time I'll be, going to assist them physically with whatever their needs are to help them kind of catch the folks they're looking for.
Is it more of a lower speed than you're used to, or is it's just more? You said it's technical. Is it tedious?
It's a great cerebral activity. I really get to go on some of the cases. I really get to go in depth, kind of use investigative techniques and some technology that allows you to resolve some of these really hard cases. But people from, I've never worked the eastern seaboard part. People are going back and forth to Atlanta, D.C., Florida. We get a lot in Florida. So we get to, assist with some of these cool high-priority cases where these guys are really bad dudes, traveling all over. Had some go back and forth to Texas, like Kurt. I've talked with Kurt out here. And some of the other guys have gotten cases from Mississippi, from all over. So it's a very, at the stage I'm at in my career, it's a great opportunity to do something cerebral, but not be like the first guy or the second, third guy going in the house anymore.
You've had enough of that. I mean, I
love it.
Yeah, of course.
With the changing political environment, the liability and stress of being the hands-on enforcement guy, it hasn't lost its luster. I'm just increasingly concerned, being the sole provider for 3 young kids, that I want to make sure that I'm there and able to provide for them.
Yes, I got your new outline, and I want you to tell the listener what CIRT is, and just give them a synopsis of it and how you got involved with that.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I'm extremely well versed in the history of the CIRT program. The CIRT program is a critical incidents response team. It is a great program. The US Marshals started, and what they do is whenever there's a critical incident, which could be, there's a sliding, not a sliding scale, but there's a variety of things they do. It could be a line of duty death, which is obviously like pretty much the worst you can have, to a suicide, to like if one of the employees, anywhere from a deputy to, an admin, to anyone that works for the service, has like the death of a young child, or something traumatic there. We've got folks that work within the court system that are marshals contract employees that, have gotten killed in car wrecks, or, one of their kids has gotten seriously hurt or killed. We go out and it's essentially like peer counseling. We're not, I'm not a medical professional, but they put us through training to do peer counseling, and just try the best we can to assist going through there and navigate what that looks like. Everybody on the team should have gone through something. There's an application process, and they apply and they go through what qualifies them or what gives them the kind of background to be effective in that space. There's some people that have been through some incredibly traumatic things, a variety. I had some shootings, so that gave me a perspective, but there's a wide swath of people that have done different things that qualify them to be able to speak into people's lives when they're going through some of these horrific situations.
Is some of it like that? Is the critical incidents, the shootings, the one that makes the news and where you take a life? I mean, are some of the people that are on that support team, or do they dealt with their own demons?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I don't want to go into extreme details, but there's some guys that have had, they've had like the loss of a child through a violent encounter. There's people that have been shot themselves. There's people that have lost family members. There's people, that have gone through some really traumatic stuff. And, looking back on that, like I consider the situations I've had, I consider myself lucky that I've not had to experience some of the horrible traumatic things that they've gone through that have qualified them to go onto that team and help other people. But it's still, I wouldn't long for it myself.
So you say is it a volunteer type position? So it's people, the peers that want to come out and want to be a part of this. They help their other peers. Do they have to? They go through an application process. Yeah,
it's 100% volunteer. When I can only speak to when I got on, but when I got on, they'd do like the kind of like Dallas would do the mass email where it says, "Hey, we've got this opportunity." People would apply. You'd put in an application. It would have to be signed off on by your command staff. And you would do the application. There'd be interviews. There'd be a kind of like a panel of people already in the program they'd meet, and they'd talk about who they wanted. You want to have a diverse representation, of people that have been through diverse life experiences, diverse backgrounds, and they would get selected to go through that. When I went on, I want to say the application process was probably 6 months. They met, they talked about who they wanted to choose, and then you would go to a training. I think my training was about a week long. I went out to Sacramento, California, and you would have people that would come in that had been experienced, peer support members, as well as professionals that were in the, in that space. That's what they do professionally, that trained us on peer counseling.
You got a guy sitting here with a cauliflower ear and veins coming out of his biceps and a jiu-jitsu t-shirt. I have to know, why would you be a part of this program? Tell our listeners.
Yeah, and that's actually one of the things that I love about the program and wanted to specifically commend them for. After my first, I had 2 shootings 5 months apart. I felt like when I went through my shootings, both the Dallas Police Department and the US Marshal Service had done a pretty decent job preparing me mentally and emotionally and psychologically for what that would look like. I don't think we used to do that back in the day, but I feel like people have really kind of embraced moving into that space and doing it effectively. So I didn't have, outside of the, immediate physiological response and psychological response and just all the worry that comes from the legal ramifications and going through a grand jury, indictment and getting no billed, because you go through that each time you take a life. It's incredibly stressful. As well as nowadays, you've got, the major scrutiny in the media, worrying about the long-term legal ramifications, being civilly sued, being, the criminal ramifications if there's anything that, because not even good shootings can sometimes face criminal ramifications if you have an over-aggressive, district attorney or folks that want to do things for political reasons. So going through that, mine was relatively both of mine were relatively tame. But what people don't, by and large, talk about is when you go through a shooting like that, all the ancillary people that are affected, as far as your family, your kids, your wife. After my first shooting, my wife had not been prepared or equipped to go through something like that. They don't train wives, they don't train spouses, they don't train kids what it looks like when their dad has to take a life or has something traumatic like that happen, where they're, thankfully my name wasn't in the news on either of those, but, on the first one, my wife was working and got a call from one of my coworkers and one of my friends that said, like, hey, your husband's been in a shooting. He's okay. But that's pretty much, actually, the first time she found out, she used to get news alerts on her phone. We stopped that. But she saw that, like, there was a shooting with the US Marshals, one person shot. And that's it. And then she gets a call from one of my coworkers and friends. It says, like, hey, your husband's in a shooting, so she doesn't know. And immediately it's like level 10, my husband's been shot. I don't know what's going on there. And that calmed down. But she still got all of this emotional and psychological response to, my husband's been in a shooting. I don't know what the legal ramifications are going to be like. I don't know what the long-term ramifications are. What do I do with all of this stuff that just got piled on me? So the CIRT team came out and they did a debrief. And I was so paranoid when they came out, I wouldn't talk to them until after I'd gone and given my statement to the sheriff's department, because the Harris County Sheriff's Department investigated my first shooting. I wouldn't talk to anybody until that was done with my lawyer. But they came out a day or two after, and we met with them, and they took the time to counsel my wife and go through everything that she could possibly feel and experience in light of, what both of us had gone through, and normalized everything for her. This is this is what you can expect. These are all these things you're feeling and experiencing are normal reactions to a abnormal event. That's one of the things that stuck with both of us, is there is no normal reaction to an abnormal event like that. The taking of a human life it should be a very abnormal event. So it meant more to me that these folks would take their own time, drop everything, and fly across the country or drive across the country, not only to help me, but to help my family. That was what got me in the program, was that, it was a male and female deputy. One was up in Sherman. We were down in Houston at the time. One was up in Sherman, and one came in from Louisiana and counseled both of us. But they took the time to care for and love my wife going through that experience.
That's amazing.
No, it is, and
Yeah.
that's what inspired you to be a part of this team.
100%. If the two of them hadn't done that for my wife, I don't think that was the catalyst that got me involved.
Let me ask you this: so for years in DPD, and I would imagine all law enforcement across the country, that whenever there's an officer involved shooting, there is a just kind of go through a check off the box. Remember, Misty, go talk to Dr. Al, someone of it that had basically a monopoly on the Dallas police officers. When you get into a shooting and you take a life, which is abnormal, and you got to go see the psych doc. You have to go do that. You have to do all these other steps, and then everything else kind of plays out, right? Whether it's a good shooting or a questionable shooting, there is a process that's got to play out. But my experiences and officers and friends that I've actually been with, and they've been in shootings, that they looked at that part as just checking a box and getting through it. That way they can get back to work and normalize it. Did you kind of see that yourself before then you saw a different side of them actually helping your spouse?
Yeah, I'd been friends with folks that had gone through shootings before. Going through it is a unique experience. And I kind of talked about this on the first episode. I didn't have a ton of emotional or psychological baggage with it. I was very lucky that both of my shootings were cut and dry. There was no gray area legally, professionally, anything like that. My shootings were. I was lucky that there wasn't any negativity associated with the circumstances or anything questionable. Any legal issues that arose out of those. But yeah, I mean, you can be as prepared as possible psychologically and emotionally to go through something like that. But as well as just preparing for the event itself. But until you go through something like that, you don't really know if you're going to rise to the occasion. And then on the backside of it, how you're going to navigate that.
From my experience, officers need support at home. And like he said, I don't think that you can get that support at home if your spouse doesn't have an understanding, a foundation to even start to understand. And so what I'm hearing is this team actively pursued your spouse and was part of they were included as part of the recovery process.
Yes, absolutely. And as far as probably both of the shootings, but I can speak for my wife in this area and say that she had a deep rage that, a man had tried to kill her husband and a man had tried to kill the father of her kids. So we've got 3 kids now, and it's the thought of becoming a single parent and raising children because some less desirable human being had tried to kill him. It's deep. There was a well of emotion there. And what do we do with that until we have somebody to process that with? And friends are great, but unless they're friends that have been through something similar to that, either military spouses or law enforcement spouses, they can't speak into that. And our folks in the church we were in were great at that, but there's still a gap of knowledge in knowing exactly what that feels like.
I could be wrong, but do we include spouses? No.
Well,
that's new.
The new wellness unit, we were doing something for the families, and we were trying to figure out how to incorporate them into the department. This is all new, and actually, what CIRT does, I'm going to try to steal some of y'all's stuff because this is good. Of going out, I don't believe that the initial response has ever been, and I don't think it's still going on with the spouse. That's kind of like you go home and take care of your family, as opposed to professionals that are peers that can actually do it and help. Because I would imagine somebody that's in a shooting, and Chris, you're super mentally tough, but you're probably not in a good headspace you're juggling with what just happened and what you just did and the close call you just had, to go home and, whether you know it or not, be 100% equipped to take care of the family and maybe in a way that somebody that's trained or a professional could.
I think most law enforcement, when they go through something like that, and this is a broad generalization, but they compartmentalize. We're very good as cops of compartmentalizing and walling off, and we'll let our family into a little bit of it, but you don't let them into everything, because it's a weird space that we operate in.
Well, they're already scared anyway, and they're nervous about anytime you walk out that door, you may not return, and you try to tamp that down. You're trying to minimize what you do. I've done it, and just you don't want to tell all the details of a story because that's going to be on their mind, and their minds are very unique. They can just, you can imagine a lot if you have bits and pieces of a story. And you can fill in the blanks, good or bad, either way.
One of the things that the service does that's really excellent, and they don't do it on everyone, but they'll do it if the situation calls for it, is if you have a shooting where multiple people were involved in the response, they'll get the wives together in kind of like a group debrief and bring all the spouses, not just wives, the spouses in. and have a group debrief with them so they get to meet the other spouses if they haven't met them yet. And it forms this kind of community of we're going through this together. So all of a sudden, instead of just one spouse being by themselves, they've got, maybe 3 or 4 other spouses there that if they haven't had a relationship with them prior, they can form one there so that as they, navigate this traumatic event, they can do it together.
Oh, that goes back to your statement. You're not alone in this, and that's great. And I know the police association, DPA, they have a really strong spouses group. They're the ones that organize a lot of the events, and they work together, and they form friendships just because of this group. And that's probably important. So, Misty, this past Saturday when we did a recording, and I got called in to go upstairs and stuff. That was a different and unique type deal. But starting off, I have been in contact with the spouse on this deal and that person's pastor too. So it is all new and uncharted. But I think we should formalize something as a department to what the U.S. Marshals does with the spouses. Because you got to have a strong base at home and put their mind at ease the best they can. Because honestly, these days you get into a shooting, you don't know what's going to happen, how it's going to unfold, or how it's going to be perceived and projected in the news.
Yeah, because our family, unless they've been in the law enforcement space or military space, they don't understand, and they can't understand. So having kind of a network of spouses, or at least 1 or 2 other ladies, ladies or men, that they can speak with and kind of bounce stuff off and go through together. We're lucky that she's formed some great friendships over the years, but it's absolutely critical to have those. It normalizes that, like we've talked about before, you're not going through this alone. There's people you can speak with.
You have on your list here, you have a TFO shooting response. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so one of the call-outs I went on, and the way that we organized our program was there was 4 teams. Each team would be primary for a month, and you'd have a backup team. So 3 times a year, your team would be the primary for whatever would happen across the nation. And you would, if you were available, you were expected to be available, but if you were available to go, you were usually, the event would happen in anywhere from 6 to 12 hours. You're on a plane, you're driving, you're getting there. Some of them are, if it's a line of duty death, you're getting there, like you're going right away. So you generally, when you were on call for the month, have a bag packed and just be ready to go, at least enough for a night or 2 to get wherever, God forbid, there was a line of duty death. So this one, talking about the Jacob Keltner shooting, was up in Rockford, Illinois. Jacob Keltner was a task force officer, TFO's task force officer, up in the Great Lakes Task Force, which is a regional task force up around Chicago, Illinois, going into Indy. And Jake was out on I can't remember what they were looking for the guy for. I don't believe it was a murder. And they had tracked the guy down to a hotel room, got a team out there, and fugitive ended up shooting through the door and killing one of the task force officers, and then jumped out a second or third story window and got on a high speed chase. And they got him, on the highway after a standoff. But Jake was killed during that, and we got that call, and within a few hours you're traveling up to it was outside of Chicago, about an hour in the suburbs in Rockford, Illinois. So we were up there as fast as possible, just dealing with all the blowout from that, because I want to say he had 2 kids. He's got a spouse that's lost her husband. You've got multiple offices affected. You've got a team of TFOs and deputy marshals that are all affected by that, and just the absolute worst situation that you could think of. And so we're going through that, and we're trying to navigate peer support, trying to meet with everybody that was, actively out on the scene, trying to meet with their spouses and loved ones, trying to handle just as much of a problem as the guys that wanted to be there that weren't there, because there's survivor guilt in a situation like that. And a lot of those task force officers, they're all naturally going to second guess, what if I had done something different? There's survivor's guilt with that. That's massive, and people talk about it a little, but it's an awful thing. As well as just going through the grieving process there, arranging a funeral, dealing with the financial ramifications of I've lost a husband, and how, we got to get a funeral, we've got to take care of kids, we've got to take care of this family. There's so much there that needs help.
You have your TFO versus the deputy funeral prep. How does that look?
Yeah, so when a deputy marshal, as a full-time government employee, is killed, there's a specific, there's like an SOP almost, a standard procedure for what that looks like, and it is unfortunately a smoothly oiled machine. But when you've got a task force officer, like it or not, they're essentially considered almost like a contract employee, because they belong to the partner agency. They belong to their sheriff's department or PD or state level agency, but they're assigned full time to the task force. So you've got the federal agency won't cover. They can't cover everything that they would cover with a line of duty death. So it's you. When you're up there doing this response, you are going to give them everything you can. You're going to figure it out. But until they've got a program now called IMT, which is an incident management team that runs a lot of the logistics of the funerals, but they're not as involved in a TFO funeral. So we're going to get the bagpipes, we're going to get the flyover, we're going to get, if they were former military, the honor guard response. And a lot of the time it's on us to figure out how we're going to do that. Like, we are going to honor the family in every way possible. And a lot of it is just figuring out how we're going to do that. And thankfully, a lot of these people on the teams have established relationships with, honor guard units. I've seen them get helicopter, plane flyovers. I've seen them get bagpipers that'll come in. Like, I've seen, some of the bagpipers just pick up bags and go on a moment's notice, and just get there to show the respect and honor that, the victim deserves.
Chris, can you talk about Tony a little bit?
Yeah. So when I was up there, a lot of cops are very stoic individuals. You come into an environment like that, and it's hard to build relationships, and it's hard to build rapport with these guys that you don't know, because when something like that goes on, we tend to wall ourselves off, and hey, the only people I'm going to let into this space are the people that I know and I built credibility with. I'm not going to open up, especially as law enforcement. I'm not going to open up to this guy that's up here to, part of the hug squad, to give me, to make me feel better about this situation that we're not going to feel better about. So when I went up on that response, you met with some of these guys initially, and a lot of them are walled off. And then, I had talked to this guy once or twice and introduced myself to him, and, every time it's, I'm okay. I don't really have anything to talk to you about. If I need to talk to you, I'll come find you. So we're up there in Rockford, and it's cold. It's a cold day, and, I was living in Mississippi at the time, so I'm freezing. Didn't bring, the appropriate attire for a funeral in heading into, the colder time in the Chicago area. And I'd talked to this guy a little bit, not a ton, and he kind of comes out of nowhere and just gives me a big hug, and he's like, I talked to some guys about you. I guess he made phone calls. Talked to some guys about you, and they vouched for you, and they said you're all right. And he, really just opened up to me, to the level that it's really hard for a lot of us to do, especially with somebody you don't know. And we talked outside that funeral for probably an hour. I've kept in touch with him since then, and we talked, a lot over the few days there. But this guy was an absolute rock star. He was a retired TFO. The guy is awesome. He was essentially like a mentor to Jake. Really old school, great operator, guy that had been on the task force before. And he carried the weight of, I could have trained him better. I could have done something to prevent this from happening. He knew the family well. It's like, when you train somebody and then you lose them to a violent encounter like that, what could I have done differently? And he carried the weight of that, and it was just brutal. So we talked a lot, and just seeing that you can be there and step into that space, and you're not really doing anything. They're doing all the work, but you're just there to listen. You're there to take it on, and it's so, we'll talk about that later, but it's just so weighty. Like, you just get to take stuff that they need to put down. Like, they're carrying these, 100-pound suitcases, and they just need to put them down on somebody. And if you can come in there for, an hour or a week or just a little bit of time and just take that load off them, so they can just dump it just so they could go to the funeral, just so they can go honor them without, going through what they're going through it. But you can just take some of that weight off them for a little bit. It's just it's amazing to be there for that and to just help them. And like I said, you're not doing anything, but you get to be a part of it.
I would imagine as somebody that's a mentor to somebody or a trainer to somebody, or you almost feel like you're having to bury a kid, one of your own.
The spouse, and we'll read the letter from her in a minute. He knew the spouse and he knew the kids, so it's like you're watching this guy that you see yourself in your trainees, and you see, what they can become. You want them to get all the good that you had out of your career without any of the bad. And then something like that happens, and it just gets destroyed in the span of a second. And then you're walking through the rubble that's created from that. It's awful.
So you mentioned a letter from the wife. Can you read that for the listener?
This letter came out while we were up there on the response, and it's just, I'm going to try and make it through this without losing my mind, but it is a letter his wife Becky wrote within the days after the event, and it's just very powerful. So I'll try to read it the best I can. This is from Becky Keltner, Jacob Keltner's wife. I'm writing this letter because my husband, Jacob Keltner, should be remembered not as another statistic, but as a man, a great man, who sacrificed his life to protect others. Jake is the love of my life. We met at Western Illinois University in January 2004, and we're inseparable. We married in 2007, and soon after I got a teaching job, and we both focused on our careers doing what we love. In 2012, we were overjoyed to add Caleb, who is going to be president someday, to our family, and then Carson, my fiery redhead, blessed us in 2014. Jake and I agreed that I would leave teaching to dedicate all of my time to raise our boys. It has been the best time of my life in our marriage. We loved each other fiercely. He was a tough guy, but a secret sweetheart. He surprised me with the best gifts, nights out, and heartfelt notes. He would do things he hated with me, like seeing a ballet, because he knew how much I loved it. He supported every endeavor I ever took on, and was there for me every second when my mom recently passed away. I was so lucky to have found a love so good and a man worth spending my life with. He was a diehard Chicago Cubs fan with me, and we almost died watching the 2016 World Series together. He loved adventure. He would try anything, bungee jumping, ziplining, whitewater rafting, and more, with a huge smile on his face. Some of those he made me do with him, and he would hold my hand the whole time. He was brave, and he made me braver. My husband was a cop's cop. He loved everything about his job and looked forward to going to work every day. He was a true patriot who wanted to protect the people of this country, so I knew when he was selected for a position on the US Marshal's Fugitive Task Force, I couldn't have stopped him from taking the job if I tried. I knew it was dangerous, but he was smart, strong, and great at what he did. I knew he would protect his fellow officers like he protected our family. Then I received the one phone call every police officer's wife has nightmares about. Only this time the nightmare was real. Now I find myself a 33-year-old widow, a mother of 2 young boys who no longer have their daddy. It feels unreal. It's unfair. I have screamed, I have cried, and nothing can make this better. He was an amazing dad. He always found ways to have fun with the boys. The night before he died, he was teaching them how to catch and throw and get ready for Little League. He built forts and set up family movie nights and boys' nights with the kids. We spent our summers relaxing and swimming in the pool. Deemed the baby whisperer, he was the only one who could get Carson to stop crying as a baby by singing to him. Telling my children he was taking from us was the worst moment of my life. They are innocent and pure, and certainly do not deserve this. They will never know their daddy like they deserve. They won't know him as a jokester. They won't know his contagious smile and his infectious laugh. He was taken from them far too soon. Being a cop's wife is not easy. It's long days and nights where you don't know when they're coming home. It's the constant worry that something will happen to them. It's keeping the kids quiet when daddy needs to sleep for a few hours. It's going to events alone because they have to work, and him always having to look over his shoulder when we're out together. But I am so proud of him. He wanted to make the world a better place, and he did make it a better place for my family. He was my rock. He supported me through thick and thin. He was my everything, and we didn't have enough time. I need him, and I don't know how I'm going to keep on going without him. I would give anything for one more hug, one more I love you, or one more joke from the man I love so much. There are no words to sum up a man who meant so much to me and to so many others. My only wish is to have a world where we stop hating each other. I'm so overwhelmed with the support I've been given from people like him everywhere these past few days. I see you. You were good just like my husband was. I will keep that in my heart forever. No matter who you are, every person has a story and people who love them. Every person has hopes and dreams. We need to accept and thrive on our differences. It's what our country was built on. It's what Jacob believed in, even after everything he had seen. It's what I believe in. He saw the worst of the worst every day, but still had so much love in his heart. He was true and loyal. We all need to show each other love, lift each other up. It's the only way to stop this unconscionable madness. A letter from Becky Kellner.
Thanks, Chris, for reading that. I'm glad we don't have a video going. Man, that is incredible and heartbreaking. So, hang on, listeners. We're trying to gather ourselves into that.
I think what you take from this is he clearly had support at home. And I think some of these officers who are involved in incidents that do go home, and I've seen it with a close friend, wasn't supported by their spouse because they didn't understand. And when you take a human life, sometimes there's judgment because they don't understand. And I think the move forward here is, I think these spouses have to be involved to allow the officer or the marshal or whomever to heal.
Yeah, she clearly understood and knew what he represented and what he wanted to be. And it's a huge loss of life. I mean, it's just the ripple effect. Sorry, listeners.
I mean, and that's just one of his responses on that team.
Yeah.
And that's heavy. That's heavy. It still is heavy. It always will be.
But it actually shows the need, though, for a team like this, that whether it's a peer support team or a wellness unit, or it should be ever evolving, because what you just described in the response that CIRT does, incorporating the families, that right there that is a testimony to why families have to be incorporated into these programs and not just the involved.
He said key words that Tony opened up to you. And I think the selection process for these groups, these support groups, is crucial, just like a selection process in SWAT or anywhere else. And he did his homework on you, and he found out that you've been in it.
Yeah, one of the great things about that, and I actually want to touch on something, come back to something in a second, but I'm not a particularly like huggable, outgoing well of personality and emotion. Like, I'm fairly stoic, and I'm not extroverted. But having people from different walks of life that have done different things, allow them to step into, a space where you need credibility. Having gone through that, I mean, I have lost track of the amount of law enforcement funerals I've gone to. I've had people close to me that have gotten killed, and just having that credibility, but then also having done that job, builds that credibility. And then speaking on that and coming back to the other thing, we've got some amazing people on that program. I can think of one lady, Lynn, who is a law enforcement spouse. She's a Marshal Service, she retired. She's a Marshal Service employee, but she is in an administrative role. She's also married to a deputy, and she is on the team and able to go in and speak to that space with the spouses and have the credibility of having been on that program, but also being married to a law enforcement officer. And she's able to go out there, and she is, I call her the rock star, because she's just like Texas through and through. She's got the big blonde hair and the bedazzled jeans, and she'll show up there and just be able to love on the families like I could never do, because she's got, the credibility of being a law enforcement spouse and knowing what that looks like. And she's able to navigate some of the spaces with the families where she is just an absolute rock star.
Yeah, I have. Everybody deals with something in their own way and their strength, and everybody has their strength and weakness. My weakness is seeing other people's pain. I have a hard time seeing them react to loss. That's what really gets me. Doing certain things, seeing certain incidents, seeing the gruesome side of humanity, that doesn't affect me as much as seeing what's left behind.
Yeah, and that's one thing that is the hardest part, but an amazing part of that program is with Tony. It's like, I've got this big bear of a man who's not going to show emotion like this, and he's showing it. And I didn't have it together. I lost it. Like, he and I were both in the parking lot of the funeral just crying like little girls. But that's what he needed in that moment. And, I wasn't going to hold it together. It certainly wasn't a fabricated response. Like, I lost my mind.
It's okay. It's okay to lose it. I mean, it's
How are you
human.
going to hold it together in a situation like that?
Yeah.
You shouldn't. If you hold it together in a situation like that, there's something wrong with you.
Yeah. I want to get into another topic that's so prevalent in this profession is suicide. I mean, San Antonio PD have been reaching out to them over the last couple months. They've had 6 suicides in a year. There's and there's a number of reasons. Everybody struggles, and I'm gonna go back to your line of "you're not alone." Can you talk about the one, the deputy that we talked about off air?
Yeah. So we had this was a few years ago. We had a call out to the Midwest. I'm going to be a little vague on this just because I don't want to put his name or, I don't, I'm sure you could look it up, but I don't want to ever expose anything that was given to us in confidence. So there was a deputy up in the Midwest who was actually a supervisor at the time, and this dude was I didn't know him personally, but from my interaction with everybody up there, was just a rock star, one of those guys that wanted to help everybody, took everything on his shoulders, and I don't know, we'll never know the whys of why he committed suicide or, the specific things that caused him to come to that moment. But he ended up committing suicide and left just some of the, I don't know that wreckage is the right word, but just left some of the after effects of that up there. And so it's a similar situation where that happens and you're going up there on a few hours notice with a bag packed. And we're going to get through the initial response, dealing with all the coworkers. He didn't have a wife or kids, but dealing with all the coworkers and the friends and the family, going through, caring for them, and also arranging a funeral for that, because we're going to give this guy a line of duty death funeral. We're going to show him the respect that he deserved. and loving on the people that are left behind in a situation like that where there's no answers. There's absolutely no answers to why something like that happens. And it's not in the program, or now it's not our place to judge what would bring a person to that. You know, I've got my views on something like that, but it's not our, when you step into something like that, you're just there to be a sponge, and you're there to take all this, you know, wreckage and emotion and be there for people that need you in their moment. And that is way harder than like a stereotypical line of duty death, just because I think when you navigate a line of duty death, having been somebody and continuing to be somebody that, you know, that could happen to any day of the week when I go to work, you kind of prepare yourself for that, because they were doing what they were supposed to do. They're not supposed to be murdered, but they're doing something that is a conclusion that's not expected, but is unfortunately reasonable when you go after dangerous people. Just like as a law enforcement officer, you could pull over a car and you don't know who's in that car, and that could be your day. That could be the day where you're gonna, you know, navigate this, and you might win, you might lose, but it's a response it's an event that is, you know, it could be behind any one of those doors you knock on any given day. But with a suicide, you don't have those answers. All you have is questions, and you think you might get answers, and you might get some answers, but every answer you get, there's 2 more questions behind.
Yeah, and there's really nobody that can answer those questions, because the one person that would have any idea of why that happened is no longer there to tell it.
And you don't know what. I think a lot of the times too, it's a natural human response to place judgment on that situation, but we don't know what somebody was going through that caused them to take that response. Like we can sit there and we can judge it, and I've been guilty of that too. But until you go through something like that, until you know what they're experiencing, you don't have the right to say that, oh, they shouldn't have done that. Like you could do that too if you were placed in the same circumstances. You know, any of us could do any of these horrible things if you're in that situation at the same time going through exactly what somebody's going through. Like, it's not our place to judge that.
No, not at all. Can you tell the listener the difference between line of duty death and suicide?
Yeah, so with the line of duty death, again, it's kind of like the TFO line of duty death. Like it or not, regardless of my personal opinions on whether or not the suicide was directly line of duty related, because my goodness, the stresses that, you know, law enforcement go through on a daily basis, like, how do you not say that everything he was going through wasn't line of duty death related? But at the end of the day, you've got, you know, on some level, state, local, you know, federal, the agency may not be willing to take on the financial liability of what that looks like.
And like in this case of the city of Dallas, I mean, because there is a difference in from a finance standpoint.
And it's not to be disparaging towards the department, because obviously, like, the line level folks want everything to be done every time. But, you know, you go up there on a response like that, and we're going to give him the line of duty death funeral, regardless of if that means coming out of our own pocket, if that means calling in favors, if that means, you know, navigating whatever you can do to get him everything. So it's a line. So the people that are left behind, his family, the coworkers, the friends, they see that response, they see that honor. So it's a heavy lift to go up there and just be like, we're going to figure this out. We're going to make it happen. We're going to call in every favor we can. You know, we're going to beg, steal, borrow, you know, do whatever we can to just get this guy the honor that he deserves.
That's amazing. I know that Chief Garcia recently has tasked us with looking at departments across Texas that do give line of duty death for suicide, and we're researching that right now. And I believe our department's going to have a response on this in 2023. We don't know how that looks, but there is a big difference in you know, Chief Foy, he ran the honor guard for years, and he understands and the honors that are given and the cumulative effect of this job that weighs on us and can put us in a dark place very easily. I want to talk about the Keyworth line of death.
Yeah. So this is talking about Jared Keyworth. When I was in Mississippi, Jared did for us the job I do now. He was a technical operations group senior inspector. So he was based out of Baton Rouge, but his AOR was Louisiana, anywhere from New Orleans, Baton Rouge, Lafayette, Lake Charles, down there, up into like northwest Louisiana, Shreveport, Ruston, Monroe. He covered Mississippi. He covered South Mississippi, and there's another guy down there who's awesome. Jake's down there. Jake's a rock star. Jake is actually somebody that I feel like I call him once a day when I don't know what I'm doing. I'm like, Jake, you got to help me with this. And they were partners. Jake was there first. He's still there. He's an absolute rock star. And Jared came in to be the second person there. So he covered our AOR. He covered Mississippi. I'd talked to him a few times. I knew him before he stepped into that role, but he covered us. So anytime, we would have those cases, it's like, hey, I need, the next level of help and expertise on this. He would be somebody that would come up and help us, or I'd talk to him on the phone. Jared was an absolute rock star. He was probably one of the hardest workers I've ever met. I mean, he'd call me at inappropriate hours, just because he was such a hard worker that he'd be up at like midnight, get back up at 4 a.m, and he would just didn't see that as abnormal. So he would call you, and when you're in the task force team leader job, like your phone's on all the time. So if somebody calls you in the middle of the night, you're picking up. He was an absolute rock star, and he was up there in the Jackson, Mississippi area, not working one of our cases, but working another team's case. And he went up and resolved one of their cases on, I want to say, it was some violent crime. I can't remember since it wasn't my team. And he's driving to the next site to do another job, and ended up getting into a really horrific car wreck, where he ended up essentially driving into the back of a tractor trailer that was broken down on the side of a really narrow, kind of dangerous 2-lane highway. He had a horrific wreck. And so we're all at the office that day. And I remember getting a call from one of our old TFOs who was he's still a state trooper. He's a sergeant now. And we end up getting a call of like, hey, we're out here on a wreck. Does one of your guys drive, such and such vehicle he was driving? Like, no, we're at the office right now. We're not operational today. He's like, well, he's got a vest on that says US Marshals. We, for the life of us, we don't know what's going on. And over the next 5 to 10 minutes, we start getting calls and piecing together what happened. And so he was assisting the South team, who does the same, responsibilities we do in southern Mississippi. They were out there covering one of their cases, and he was going to the next site with them. So we're figuring out everything that's going on. We're talking to the initial trooper that responded, and it's not looking good. So we get some folks out there. Some folks were already out there. We get some folks going, and we figure out that it was Jared, and he's, we don't know the extent of his injuries, but it's not looking good. So my partner Jack and I immediately go over to the hospital as they're life flighting him, and we're there when he comes into the ER to just figure out what's going on, because we had heard it's not good, but you don't know what that means. You don't know what the physical situation is. So we get there when he comes into the ER, and it's bad. It is the most horrific accident I've ever seen. It was so bad I almost didn't recognize him at first. And so we're there, and then we're navigating, is he going to make it? Is he not going to make it? What are we doing here? We've got his family that's down in Louisiana. People are immediately going out to the wife, because he's got 2 kids too. They're immediately going out to the wife to notify her and bring her up there. I mean, they're throwing her in a car and saying, "Hey, we're getting you to the hospital." And I've had a lot of like things I really wouldn't want to do in my life, especially with the CIRT team. But like the last thing, I'm so grateful that I've never had to be the person that goes to notify the spouse and be like, "Hey, you're coming in a car. We're driving 3 hours right now to go see your husband." And we don't know what the situation on the ground is. We don't know if he's going to make it, if he's not going to make it. Navigating that has got to be absolutely horrific. So I'm there at the hospital, and I've just become I've become the primary on this call just because it was in my AOR. You would never make the primary somebody that knew the victim. You would never do that. But it is what it is. I'm there. I mean, I'm 5 minutes. My office is 5 to 10 minutes from the hospital. So I've now become the primary, and we're navigating this. I'm trying to navigate the CIRT response, chief level, headquarters level stuff, as well as just getting everything prepped for the wife to get there. And the wife gets there, and I take her. I didn't know her personally until that event. I'd known of her, but I didn't know her. And I'm walking her into the ER to see her husband, and just the physical shape he's in was the absolute worst thing I've ever had to do in my life. Just taking this woman to see her husband that's got these horrific injuries, and probably not something we're supposed to do, but I knew Jared was a Christian, and he was pretty outspoken about it. So, I don't really care if this is right or wrong, but I asked her if, before we went in there, if we could pray, and we did. And just before we walked her in there, and I was probably in a worse shape than she was. I didn't let go of her hand. But having to navigate that was just horrific. I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy. But and the thing I say about it is I was incredibly grateful that I was able to be there for that. Just to show him the honor that he deserved and show his wife the honor that she deserved. Just absolutely horrific thing. And so we've got the spouse there, and then we're trying to get his family in from all over the country. The technical operations group in the US Marshal Service did the most outstanding job. I mean, they put people on planes. They had people at people's houses, as well as the CIRT team, obviously. They had people go to their houses, pick them up, get them on planes, and get them there, anywhere within a few hours to the next morning. Using government resources that, whatever they could find to make it happen. So outside of the wife, I think it was that same night, but a few hours later, his mom gets there, and I've got to do it all over again. I'm walking his mom in there and doing the same exact thing. So back to back, 6 hours apart maybe, walking in the spouse as well as the mom to see Jared, who's just, he's in a, coma, obviously. But he just is I've never seen a human body like that. The dude fought. He did not want to go. And he didn't go for like days. But I mean, it was a horrific scene.
That's a lot for you to absorb, Chris, as a coworker, a friend, having to see someone you're close to be in that shape and take the burden, taking on the responsibility of being a servant yet again and taking care of his family.
Yeah.
It's a lot for you to take in.
That's all that matters, is that the family is taken care of in that event. That's the only thing that matters, is that the wife is never alone. I think their kids came up the next day. I can't remember it's such a blur at this point. I can't remember all the specifics. But making sure the kids, the wife, the family are all taken care of, that's all that matters. That was actually my second daughter's birthday that day, and we had gone to the hospital initially, And it was in before the wife showed up, before we knew his like full condition on whether or not he was going to make it. I went home to see her for like 30 minutes for her birthday, and then kind of gave her a hug. And she was little at the time. She's 4 now, so would have been their 3rd birthday then. Got to see her briefly, and then I got a call from my boss, who's a great guy. He was like, "Hey, you need to get back there." I'm like, "Okay, it's give the kids a hug." My folks were in town. Thank God, every time my folks are in town, something horrific happens. But they're in town, so they're able to be with my wife and the kids and celebrate the birthday. But it's just like, it doesn't matter. We're going. And just people don't see that stuff when it's like I'm not saying that, oh, good on me, I dropped my family responsibilities, but it's like that's what you have to do. So just run out of the birthday, get back down there in time for the wife to show up, dealing with the mom, getting the kids in the next day, getting his dad and the dad's wife, getting everybody in there, the extended family, folks from all over the country that were his best friends. We're getting everybody in essentially so they can say their goodbyes while he's on life support. And Jared was such a to his character, he's such a hero that even they kept him on life support so long because he was an organ donor. And I don't want to screw up the specifics of this, but even through his organ donation, he saved a life. I can't remember if it was a kidney or a liver or a heart, but one of the organs he was able to pass on, they arranged it. That's why he had to stay on life support so long, was so they could do the organ donation and save another life. And I'd never been through an organ donation before. And I mean, you've got a Marshal Service medic, who's a guy named Jeremy, who's another just absolute rock star, who's not on the CIRT team, but he's with Jared throughout that entire process. He's in the room as they're doing the organ donation. And it's just like the level of compassion and care that these folks are doing to honor Jared and to be with him throughout that entire process. And the hospital staff, this was during COVID, so you are not allowed to have, I think you're allowed to have like one person with us and one person with, whoever's in the hospital. And we just bulldogged them and they dropped everything for us. You've got the security guards coming around telling us to pull our masks up and you can only have, these so many people in the halls. And it's like, no, we're not doing that. Not for this. And they just pulled out the red carpet to make sure. I mean, that was the UMMC and Jackson just pulled out every stop they could to help us in that situation. And just seeing the level of respect there through the ICU, through the ER, through the organ donation. They do an honor walk when they do the organ donation where they will pull them out of ICU to go down towards essentially the prep to do surgery. And they'll line the walls. We had local law enforcement come in, some of the partner agencies, anybody. Like, we put a call out to everybody, whoever can come in for this. And I was just astounded. And I shouldn't have been because I'd been there 6 years. But just the law enforcement community in central Mississippi is just so tight. Just seeing the level of people that didn't know him, they would come out there to honor him, was just so amazing.
It's inspiring. Can you talk about the funeral, getting him buried in Slidell?
Yeah, this was actually really cool. And without delving into politics, the governor of Louisiana, to my knowledge, before this event was not, he was on the kind of left side of the fence and probably not someone you would associate with being like heavily pro law enforcement. I think it's Governor Edwards, if I'm correct. But Jared was a veteran. He was in the US Army Old Guard, which is actually really cool. They've got a bunch of responsibilities, but one of the things they do is, they do Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. They do a lot of the ceremonial and honor responsibilities with the U.S. Army. And Jared was part of that unit, and we'll go in depth into some of the stuff he did there that was part of the funeral that was really cool. But so the family wanted him to be buried at a veterans cemetery, and you don't just get buried in a veterans cemetery. There's a wait list for something like that. It's anywhere from weeks to months, and I don't know who it was called the governor, and that governor got him a spot to be buried there in a few days. And just seeing that, the outpouring of support there was absolutely just astounding.
Chris, there's a lot of tradition when it comes to military and law enforcement and firefighter, for any first responder, the ceremonies. Can you tell the listener about the riderless horse?
Yeah, so getting into that for the funeral, what we did with Jared was after the organ donation, they arranged a transport, and all of the local agencies did a really good job. It was another one of those things where in central Mississippi, we had a really good communication network with a lot of the local agencies. We had kind of an investigators network where I was able to put out on there like, hey, this transport is happening, and probably 100 different folks from 20 different agencies showed up to help escort the body with the state troop where Jared down to Louisiana to the funeral home down there. So you've got all these different agencies that are showing up and lining the sidewalk, getting Jared loaded up, getting him down there, and then they're running, the full-blown escort with the Mississippi Highway Patrol down there, handing him off to Louisiana Highway Patrol or LSP, and getting him down to the funeral home, and then getting all of that arranged and getting the family's wishes, getting everything that the family wants. The incident management team had come in for that, and they're handling some of because it's a line of duty death, they're handling the vast majority of the logistics, which is great for us because then we can focus on the family, which is really supposed to be our main responsibility. The other stuff we just did out of necessity. So the incident management team is there navigating the heavy lifting as far as just getting the funeral arrangements ready to go. And so we get down there, and they do the full-blown line-of-duty death funeral for Jared, which was outstanding. It was, I can't remember the town it was in Louisiana, but there was a great showing, great level of respect. And then after the funeral, they go to the gravesite, which is where the riderless horse comes in. So one of the things they do occasionally at law enforcement and military funerals, they'll have a riderless horse, which is led by, a single soldier or a single law enforcement officer. And it is a horse that's riderless, in full, the horse is fully dressed out. And there's, they'll put boots backwards in the stirrups, to represent, the team or the military group has lost their leader, and so they lead the horse, just showing that it exemplifies that there's a void that is now created, lacking that leader. And one of the cool things about Jared that he would never, I didn't find out about this till after he died, was during Ronald Reagan's funeral, when he was part of the U.S. Army Old Guard. He was the soldier that led Reagan's horse during that funeral procession. And so you can Google that photo, Reagan riderless horse, and you see these beautiful pictures of Jared in his, uniform leading Reagan's horse during that procession. And it's just absolutely impressive.
No, it's an incredible sight. It's beautiful. I mean, it's such a representation of just of service and uniform. It's incredible. It's an incredible sight.
So one of the things they did, knowing that, was at the internment, after the funeral, I was completely unaware they were even going to do this. They had Jared's daughter lead a riderless horse to the gravesite, and just how powerful that was to see two generations, a daughter as well as her father, having done that to honor, both Reagan as well as Jared was just one of the most powerful things I've ever seen in my life.
How did that make you feel?
Words can't express. I've got both those photos in my office, just to remember that, and one day I'll be able to explain, one day I'll have that moment when I can go through with my own kids and show them some of those photos and explain to them, on a deeper level than a 4-year-old or a 6-year-old can grasp, and explain that to them and show that to them. And it's something that, I'll be able to use as an example of how we should honor other people for the next generation.
Chris, the emotional weight of this program, I was talking a little bit off air about the just dipping my toe into the wellness unit. I'm starting to see that. The emotional weight, how does that affect you?
Yeah, so kind of like I explained earlier, you go into these situations where people are carrying these 100-pound suitcase bags, and they can't carry them, and you do everything you can to take that weight from them. It's very temporary. You're not permanently taking it away, but even if it gets them 20 minutes, an hour, a night, you're trying to take everything you can, but that baggage definitely becomes your baggage. And the more and more of those that you do, the longer you're carrying that weight. But one of the things that the CIRT program does that's really, really well done is they'll have rotating teams that come in. So there'll be the initial team that comes in on something like a line of duty death for the first week, and they're handling the immediacy, the immediate response. And then when the second team comes in, they actually have a debrief for those people before they go back home, where they debrief the people that were doing the debriefing. And it allows you, on some level, to have a little bit of that weight taken off by other people. And then they debrief the second team as well, which is really smart. Because you can't release these people back into the wild with all of the stress they've taken on. They don't take all of it because you're going to carry it with you for the rest of your life. But it becomes a weight that you carry, and the more and more you do of those, I kind of think it's a really good idea to, you get rotated off every, after your month, but it's probably a good idea every few years to kind of have them just take a step back. And that's what I've done now. I'm no longer on the team at the moment just because of some new work responsibilities and having 3 kids, 6 and under. I'll rotate back on, hopefully, at some point. But right now I'm able to focus on family and career and just take a kind of a much-needed break from that.
Yeah, you've earned it, Chris. I mean, it's everything you've already explained and some of the things you have not even spoke of today that you've carried. Can you talk about introverted versus extroverted people doing this type of work?
I consider myself, despite the fact that I'm on a podcast talking for like an hour and a half, I consider myself a very introverted person, especially growing up in like New England. Like being an introverted person from New England, you got to work hard to get inside the circle. Once you're in the circle, you're in. But being an introverted person going into those situations where you've got to become, like, introverted people are capable of being extroverted. It is just an exhausting affair to go through that. So being an introverted person that's being forced to go through these because you care deeply about the people that you're there to help, it is just a weight. And you go, like, I would go home, you end up working like 12 to 16 hour shifts doing these things, and you go back to the hotel room after, and it's just like, I don't want to drink. I don't want to go hang out. Like, they would always try and do debriefs afterwards. Like, dude, I don't want to do a debrief. I want to go sit in my hotel room and have quiet. I want to go work out. I want to put on my headphones and pretend you guys don't exist for an hour. And it's just this exhausting thing. So learning how to navigate that, because some people are extroverted and they gain energy from doing these extroverted things versus like an introverted person. They're emptying the tank, and it's like, I need some peace and quiet to go and refill that tank so I can do it all over again the next day.
Yeah. Do you get your motivation because it is out of character for you as you being an introvert. Do you get your motivation just knowing you help someone?
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole thing. It's like I didn't particularly want to rotate off the team now because you see the value of what you're doing. And you hear from people later about the value, even if you don't think you did anything. Like, you hear from people later that it was very, meaningful, that you showed their loved one respect in that situation. So, yeah, I mean, learning how to, I don't want to use the word like self-care, but learning how to take care of yourself so that you can do more of that it's a tricky thing to navigate.
And it's even trickier when you have a close friend that you add to the equation.
Absolutely.
Right?
And then, like we talked about before, you've got to also go back and have a, healthy marriage and kids that you want to not bring. You don't want to throw those bags on your kids or your spouse because they didn't ask for that.
But they're along for the ride. And
sometimes they're hostages, but they're along for the ride.
I think moving forward, Chris has given us ways to improve. A lot of agencies are establishing peer support groups. It's evolving and much needed, but we have to learn from this. We have to take these pieces and make these peer support groups healthier.
Yeah, that's the department's need. A law enforcement or any first responder career, it's at least a 2 decade. That's the goals, right? To get to two decades plus, and then that's in a lot of first responders. This is their life. They do this, and then a lot of them don't know what to do after. There's not a lot of planning, but to make it through 2 decades plus, 3 decades plus career, seeing all that you see and all the experiences, all the trauma that you're exposed to, and then whether you like it or not, the families. I really am so glad you touched on taking care of the families, because that is something we've lacked. We've not done a good job of.
Yeah, we've left them out of the loop.
They'll come in and talk to the children sometimes too, if that's something they want. Which I've never had to do that, but they'll take the time to talk to the children too, to make sure, like the spouses, that they're getting some level of care.
Yeah, ATO. Yeah, we provide some of our confidential counselors. Not all of them, because it's a specialty to deal with the family, but some of the confidential counselors, they do specialize in like Barbara Crump. She's fantastic. Dottie's a Swiss Army knife in the mental health field, but she can do it all. But Dr. T, there are so many that now are specializing in this, and Dr. T is really big on the couples workshops of putting those presentations out there for the first responders because it's all symbiotic, right? It's not just you being a badass tactically, and some people cope. There's some people that cope the wrong ways, right? When it comes to work-life balance and work and life responsibilities, what approach do you take, and what advice could you give someone that's either on a peer support team or a part of a response team, that they can take care of themselves and juggle all this?
Yeah, and I don't claim that I do not have it all figured out. I don't think I've got the perfect response to that. But there's times when you have to be selfish, and there's times when you have to pour into others. And when you go on these call-outs, you have to do your entire mission is based around other people. But when you're not on the call-outs, you need to be doing what you can to take care of yourself and take care of your family. And there's times when I have to be selfish, and my wife is very accommodating, understanding that, like, if I've got to go get an hour workout for the day, she might want me to be home, but like, she understands that that's something we're going to do for our overall, health and wellness as a family, or emotional, because like, she doesn't want me to be home when I'm just a hothead and, need to go blow some steam off from everything I've carried for the day. But it's also one of those things where it's a delicate balance where when I'm home, I need to be home. I can't bring my work, and I bring my work. I physically work from home a lot. So being present and 100% dialed in for my kids is something that I need to work on better to manage that well. So when I'm home, I am there for them, and I'm not responding to stuff on my computer or responding to stuff on my cell phone, because every time the cell phone rings, I pick it up. Learning how to balance that, be present as a father, be present as a husband, but also be, an outstanding, hardworking employee. And then in the CIRT realm, like when I was doing that, be present at the drop of a dime to pick up bags and go halfway across the country to love on another family when they need it in their moment of need.
I am so glad. I've been wanting to get you back on here for over a year now, and you living out of state, and this is the only, I haven't seen you since we recorded last, right?
I think so.
Wow. So you're a fan of this podcast, of course, and we're always texting back and forth, and you're giving feedback and advice, and I value what you tell me. So now that you have Misty and I here, and you have the mic, and you got us cornered.
Be the voice.
Yeah, be the voice. What can we do to make this better, and what would you like this for us to do?
I love it, and I was thinking about this on the way down here. Is just I know you hear it a lot. Like you get people that text you and or call you and say, especially having like administrative level chief support now, just how important it is. But this podcast and this getting the diversity of folks that come on here is one of the better things I've seen in going on a 17-year law enforcement career. This is important, and I'm very grateful you guys are doing this, because you've got people from all ends of the spectrum that are coming in. And I honestly wouldn't change a thing. Like there's some of the podcast episodes that I've listened to that I wouldn't think I'd get a huge takeaway from, and you listen to them, and it's like, man, this is really important for people to hear. And I bullied my wife into listening to some of the episodes.
Thank you.
And I think everybody can take something from them. And I'm really happy you guys are doing this, because you know better than I. You've got people from all over the country and outside the country that have reached out to you saying how important it is. And just to, like you touched upon before, the big lie is that when we're going through something alone, and that nobody else is going through this, and I'm all alone, and I don't have anybody I can reach out to for support. And you've got these diversity of folks that come in and talk about these very abnormal situations that people are going through, and how to walk through that, and how to respond appropriately, good and bad. With some of the things you can do right and some of the things that we've done wrong. Like I've done a lot of things wrong. But just normalizing those experiences so that people know that when they're going through something like this, they're not alone. There's a whole community of people that have gone through this and are going to go through it. And then the responsibility of when you've gone through something like that. Like I view myself as having a responsibility for folks that are coming up behind me when they go through something, that I have to do what I can to, help them, the good and the bad, how to navigate that appropriately.
I think it's a perfect way to wrap it up, man. Again, you're a treasure to this profession, and in your passion for service is inspiring to me as a friend and a peer, and I can't wait for the listeners to hear your second act. And it's heavier than the first, but I think it's needed, and I'm going to be borrowing a lot of your practices and your vision on supporting our peers, because we need it now more than ever. Thank you for your service, and thank you for your time, for coming in and supporting us and supporting the ATO and all of your peers and law enforcement and first responders across the country.
Yeah, thanks for making us better.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Misty.
Hey, brother, hey, sister, I'll never give up on you. Hey, Mrs., hey, mister, I'll see this all the way through. No matter how hard sun and the moon. I'll never give up on you. Down when you're lonely, I'll pull you up. Life leaves you heavy when the going gets tough. I'll be your shoulder, together we'll run. Up from the bottom, yeah, we'll rise above. Hey brother, hey sister, I'll never give up on you. Hey Mrs., hey mister, I'll see this all the way through. No matter how far the sun and the moon, I'll never give up on you. Sister, I'll never give up on you. Hey Mrs., hey mister, I'll see this all the way through. No matter how far, for the gold and the blue, I'll never give up